Hello, I'm Stephen Carroll. Welcome to People in Profit, where we look at how business shapes our world. Coming up, a gig or a job or somewhere in between, how a court ruling on Uber drivers in the UK could change things for those working in the so-called sharing economy. Can the markets help predict the outcome of the US presidential election? We'll be crunching the key numbers. And rolling out the red carpet for big spending tourists, how Paris is trying to tempt back South Korean visitors. First up though, it's a label that means a world of difference. Being an employee in many countries gives you rights to holiday pay, minimum wage and redundancy if you lose your job. As the so-called gig economy grows, more people are working freelance as independent contractors, which gives them increased flexibility, but none of those basic protections. Some unions say companies are abusing the freelance status to dodge the cost of paying an employee. An employment tribunal in London recently agreed with that argument concerning two drivers for the taxi-hailing company Uber. It's been described as a groundbreaking decision, as Julia Kim now reports.
Uber has long argued that it's simply a platform that connects drivers with riders. The ride-hailing app says its drivers are self-employed because they can choose to work whenever they want. But a London employment tribunal has unanimously decided that drivers should be classified as workers. It ruled that the app's control over the driver's fee, route and conduct during a ride amounts to the terms and conditions of a worker's contract.
Uber drivers are now entitled to basic workers' rights, such as to receive the minimum wage and to be paid for their holiday in the same way that every other worker is entitled to those rights.
Uber drivers in the United States and France are fighting similar battles. In California, the ride-hailing app won its right to class 400,000 drivers as self-employed, but faces a settlement bill of at least $100 million. In France, the company is in hot water with the nation's Social Security Authority, which is demanding that Uber drivers be considered as employees. Uber is appealing all claims against its classification of drivers as individual contractors. But some say these cases are symptomatic of a deeper problem with the so-called gig economy, where individuals work for several employers without a fixed contract. The downside of this business model was highlighted by the collapse of food delivery app Take Eat Easy. Hundreds of French couriers are fighting for employee status to be eligible for redundancy pay. The tech company went bankrupt in July, owing money to hundreds of its delivery crew.
Well, to talk about this issue further, I'm joined by Dr. Mark Butler, who's a lecturer in employment law at Lancaster University in the UK. Dr. Butler, thanks for joining us. Could you put this decision in context for us? Is this a big change for workers that work for companies like Uber?
Potentially so. There's two sides of this, really. One side is we have to be careful when considering the implications of this case, in that it might not be as big a decision as what some media comments seem to be suggesting. And by that, what I mean is that, first of all, it's only a tribunal hearing, so it's the lowest court within the employment court structure in the UK, which is subject to appeal, with Uber already intimating that they are going to appeal this decision. So this decision might not stay standing after that appeal. But with it being a tribunal decision itself, it has limited impact outside of those claimants that brought the case before the Employment Tribunal on this instance. So at present, it may only have an impact on the 19 drivers that were involved within that particular hearing. So it's limited in that sense. However, it is of great potential to other such arrangements like Uber, in the sense of this is the first time we've seen a company that's involved in the gig economy actually being found to have workers in the legal sense, whereas previously it's always been on a self-employed independent contractor basis.
Now, unions argue that there are companies out there abusing those self-employed contractors when there really are employees. Is this something that we're seeing from other cases outside of the Uber case more frequently now because of the rise of companies in the gig economy?
Potentially that is the case, but it would have to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. I don't know of any off the top of my head where such abuse is carrying on, but you can imagine with such an arrangement bringing such vast costs at vast profits at such little cost, then you can see why some companies might want to arrange it in such a way that they do limit the rights attached to the workforce because it just leads to those greater profits. But as I say, this is going to be on a case-by-case basis. So each individual company in the gig economy would have to be looked at closely and scrutinised to see whether they are, in effect, an employer just trying to hide themselves away as being some contractor in which independent contractors are working under.
Do you think decisions like the one that we've had, we know that Uber settled in California, for example, we know there's cases ongoing in other countries as well. Do you think companies like Uber, like Deliveroo, like TaskRabbit are going to change their practices, change the way they treat their employees? Or their workers, I should say?
Indeed. It wholly depends on what the actual practical consequences of this decision is, because, as I mentioned, this is subject to an appeal, so this might be overturned and then there will be absolutely no change to how things are set up. But what Uber might want to do is have a look at what actual cost this will cost Uber as a company, because the costs might be quite minimal. And if that's the case, then there's no need to change the arrangement. But if we end up with an appeal decision, let's be honest, this is something that has such wide ramifications, and because of the consequences, this is something we as employment lawyers expect to go not only to the appeal tribunal, but up to the Court of Appeal and potentially the Supreme Court. So it will wholly depend on what the upper appeal courts hold in relation to such arrangements. If that is quite wide-ranging and that is serious implications, then the gig economy will have to change the way that they treat their workforce.
OK, Dr. Mark Butler from Lancaster University, thank you for your time. We'll, of course, continue to watch that story closely. Now, next, the markets will be watching closely as voters in the United States go to the polls on Tuesday. Investors have already been placing their bets ahead of Election Day. Polls showing the gap between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton narrowing have sent Wall Street's so-called fear index soaring. Can these market movements help to predict the election outcome, though? I put that question to market analyst Craig Earlham.
Well, I think the clear thing that the markets tell us is who they favour. Since Hillary Clinton took that large poll lead, the markets have been doing OK. They've not been doing remarkably, of course. We're in the midst of corporate earnings season, which is not exactly being a knockout at a time when the Federal Reserve is looking to raise interest rates. But since the gap started to close following those revelations, we have seen a lot more fear in the markets. The VIX, the fear index, actually spiking in line, really, with Donald Trump's improving poll numbers, which I think says a lot about people's perception of Donald Trump and what it means for the US economy.
So the markets can tell us a lot about how investors are feeling. Kate Moody's been looking into more detail of this, Kate.
Well, Stephen, as we just heard there, for the past few months, global stock markets have been betting on a Hillary Clinton victory. That's because she's seen as a status quo candidate who would broadly continue her Democratic predecessor's policies, and that provides certainty for investors. The anti-establishment Donald Trump is more of an unknown quantity, and markets don't like that uncertainty. Remember what happened with Brexit. The shock result in June saw the FTSE 100 plummet on the day after the referendum. Many major indices around the world follow suit because investors hadn't been expecting that outcome. A Trump victory could provoke a similar effect. So what will investors be watching on Election Day? The vote will have an immediate impact on stock markets around the world. Asian markets will be trading when the results come in. Individual sectors like insurance, energy, or commodities could also be key. Bond trading will reflect reassurance or concerns about the safety of investing in the U.S. government. Currency markets trade 24 hours a day, and they will react immediately. The U.S. dollar would likely gain on a Clinton victory. But it's also worth keeping an eye on Mexico's currency. The peso has become something of a gauge of Trump's prospects, in part because of his fierce rhetoric about America's southern neighbor, as well as his anti-trade platform. When Trump's numbers improved, the peso has fallen and vice versa. So far this year, the peso is down 12% against the dollar, one of many things to watch out for on November the 8th. Stephen?
Kate, thank you. It'll be a busy night on financial markets. Next, it's been a dismal year for tourism in Paris. Terror attacks and flooding helped to put off an estimated 1 million visitors from coming to the French capital this year. In particular, there's been a sharp drop in tourists from Asia. The city's tourism board has invited groups of tour operators to Paris to reassure them the city is still a safe place to come on holiday. Our reporters Claire Williams and Karina Shabour joined one such delegation from South Korea.
The finale to a dream holiday in Paris. These South Korean tour operators are being treated like stars.
Oh, beautiful opera house.
Paris's regional tourism board organised the trip to seduce and reassure. On the agenda, museums, top restaurants and Paris's central police station.
Je vais vous faire une présentation de la salle opérationnelle d'ordre public.
There are 214 CCTV cameras in Paris's most touristy areas. Asian visitors are known for carrying large amounts of cash on them, the perfect target for pickpockets.
Right now, there are two main reasons people worry. Classic crime like violent robberies, which we've managed to bring down, and then anxiety following the terrorist attacks in France. We're explaining to them that we're taking special care to secure tourist areas.
Anxieties that have put tourists off, particularly from Asia. The number of South Koreans visiting the French capital has dropped by 15% this year.
After the Paris terror and Nice terror, the Korean people got very much shocked because of France is a very safe country, they expect.
The terror attack in the concert hall, the attack in Nice, that happened a while ago, so people will start coming back.
Well, one of the sectors that's been the most hard hit by the drop in Asian tourist numbers is the Grand Magasin, the famous department stores. South Koreans spend about 180 euros a day when they're in the French capital, so the city is hoping they'll feel reassured and start coming back again.
Well, that's it for this People in Profit. If you've any comments on the stories that we've been covering, get in touch on Facebook at France 24 Business, or you can tweet me at NewsStephen. Until next time, thanks for watching.